Hello, my name is Tina Beattie, and this is the first in a series of conversations I'm going to do with women of faith from around the world about how they're experiencing their faith and where they find hope and meaning, what the challenges are in this time of a global crisis. And I'm delighted that my first guest in conversation with me today is Leslie Colvin, who I have known for a while through our shared association with the organisation Catholic Women Speak. Leslie is a Catholic laywoman and writer. She's communications coordinator for the Catholic Committee of the South's Gathering for Mission, a project inspired by Pope Francis's call for dialogue. And she's also on the editorial team for the Centre of Action and Contemplation's Daily Meditation. And Leslie is based in Alabama. Is that correct, Leslie? Yes.
Yes.
We're very proud to say that her essay, Life, Freedom and Dignity, Reflections of a Black American Catholic, is included in Visions and Vocations, Catholic Women Speak, which is a book that we published in 2018 on the occasion of the 2018 Synod of Bishops on Young People, Faith and Vocational Discernment. And Leslie has been interviewed by American Magazine and Vatican Radio on race issues. She's developing a retreat based on Thomas Merton's writings on white supremacy and racial justice. So welcome, Leslie. I'm so delighted you can join us. And I wanted to start our conversation today by reading a little bit from the essay you wrote for Visions and Vocations, because it seems to me like a timely place to start. You wrote, "When I listen to mass readings of Moses leading his people from bondage to freedom, I hear it as an invitation to remember the bondage of my African ancestors and the continuing struggles of my people, simply to have their dignity recognized in theory and in practice. As history shows, these struggles persist until a single event appears to become a catalyst for change." Now, around the world, we have been watching and many have been joining in the Black Lives Matter protests sparked by the brutal killing of George Floyd. And I just thought, reading that section that you wrote, do you think this might be a catalyst for the kind of transformation you're talking about there?
Tina, hello. I pray that it is. There have been so many tragedies. Before the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor was killed while sleeping in her bed in Louisville, Kentucky. The police had wrong information and thought they were doing a drug bust, and she was actually a first responder dealing with COVID, and her boyfriend thought that it was someone breaking in the house, so he pulled out his firearm, and she was killed while sleeping in her bed. Shortly before that, in Georgia, there was the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, who was a young African-American man doing a jog. And there were those who followed him with a firearm and killed him. So there have been a number of recent tragedies that hit you at your core. I think that with George Floyd's murder, what is striking so many people is that a young woman was able to capture it on her cell phone video. And this morning I was thinking back to the civil rights movement and Bull Connor in law enforcement in Birmingham putting dogs and releasing water hoses on protesters who were demanding their rights. And the tide did not turn until television images of that happening struck the nerve of a community larger than the African American community. So I think in a similar way, this image of seeing a man kneel on another man's neck with his hand in his pocket, a law enforcement officer, one who is sworn to serve and to protect, kneeling on someone's neck, one of the most vulnerable spots on our body. I think that is why there is such an outburst of anger. And again, we hear the cry, Black Lives Matter. I have been touched that the call has been throughout the world. People recognize this as a grave injustice. And so I pray that this is the tipping point where we can become closer to becoming the perfect union that the United States aspires to be.
Thank you, Leslie. There are other crises and traumas. There's the global pandemic, there's a political crisis looming in the United States, as we all know. So it's almost the kind of perfect storm right now. And I wonder if you can say a little about how you as a Catholic woman find your faith sustains you in this, or does it pose challenges to the way you experience your faith? What happens for you at a time like this? Because I know that we've spoken before about how you live in a part of the United States where, as a Black Catholic woman, you're in a kind of double or triple minority. Just tell us a little bit about how all that comes together, or maybe doesn't, for you right now.
My faith is in God, and the Catholic Church has been an avenue, the primary avenue, through which I learn about the love and mercy of this triune God. I also recognize, though, that the racism that is throughout this nation is not left outside the doors of the church. And that is difficult. It's painful to accept that. But then Jesus was not accepted by all the people who shared his faith. And so I find comfort in that. I believe that God, the divine transcends the various labels and groupings that we have in society. I believe that the incarnation, from the first incarnation of the divine through creation to the second incarnation, which we most often speak about, the birth of Jesus and his lived experience as a human, through to his death and resurrection. I think that all of that provides a comfort in that he did not have it easy. And I believe that it's part of the human condition. And I pray that my prayer is that everyone on their journey moves closer to the divine, and that they are courageous enough to move beyond the limitations of the boxes in which they exist. There are some, I do social media, and it is so disappointing to see how in so many Catholic groups, individuals have a litmus test for what it means to be what they call a true Catholic. And I engaged in an exchange with someone earlier this week who sees the flag of the United States, that sees the flag of the United States as an item protected by the church because it's a symbol of the government, and that the church endorses the authority of governments. So I tried to explain to her that the government has a role in society and that the church has a different role in society. Unfortunately, in the United States, we have conflated faith and patriotism into this bizarre form of nationalism now. And the language that's used, the language and the approaches that are used don't require depth of thought. And it's easy to say, yes, you cannot turn my flag upside down. You can't stand on my flag. But that's not my faith in God. That flag does not represent my faith in God. So living at the United States at this time, understanding that the executive leadership of this country at this point was put into office by a lot of Catholic votes is very distressing. That so many of them continue to support him is beyond me. So there is a complexity in being a Catholic for me as a citizen of the United States, as a resident right now of Alabama. But again, the divine transcends those boundaries, and we cannot put God in a box. So many try to do that, and not just Catholics, not just Christians. You know, I think that people have shown from a number of faith traditions that if I put the divine here, you either believe what I say is here in this space, or you are not a true believer. And I think similar statements were made to Jesus. You know, who was he to speak to this Samaritan woman? She was unworthy, unclean, just because she was a Samaritan. To not participate in the execution of the woman caught in adultery, a grave sin. How dare he not participate in that? So it is difficult, but again, my faith is in God. And while I love my church, I know that my church has its flaws, just as every other system or organization that is run by humanity, or that humanity has a lead role in.
On the one hand, you touch on an absolutely perennial problem, which you say, as you say, goes back to the time of Jesus, the conflict of loyalties between a radically deconstructive faith, in a way, which asks us to stand obliquely to all these earthly powers and institutions, but at the same time, something that manifests itself in very particular ways in the context we find ourselves in. And I suppose, without wanting to go into terribly complex ethical debates, it seems tragic that what has been enabled in the church in recent decades is almost the litmus test of being Catholic seems to be narrowed to a very small range of issues, primarily to do with sexuality and reproduction. And that has allowed a lot of political abuses to go unchecked by an obsessive, well, Pope Francis used the word obsession with homosexuality, abortion, gender issues. I mean, he's opened up the church to social justice issues, and, as we know, to environmental issues. One of the things that really interests me in what you said was about creation as the first incarnation. And I'm very interested in the extent to which many Catholic women are saying that while churches have been closed and they haven't had access to formal masses, they have found in this renewal of nature something very sustaining and powerful. I wonder if you've experienced any of that.
I have. I moved home to care for my mother 4 years ago. So right now I'm speaking to you from the home that my father built, the home in which I grew up. And my dad loved working in the yard. Just, I never understood it at all. And most of my adult life, I lived in other states and in an apartment. So I never had, I mean, I used the outdoors to go from one place to the other, you know. And since I've been home, I've actually gained an appreciation of my dad's time outside, working in the yard. Not that I really do yard work, but I will go and I will pull up weeds. But I've also created a lovely area for my mother on the patio with the flowers. And I started a few years ago hanging hummingbird feeders. My mom has fed birds my whole life, but we never had hummingbirds before. So I put feeders out and they came. So
Wow.
it's amazing. And at first my mom was kind of leery of them because they're so small and they fly so fast, you know, they just zip by. But she's even gotten now where she gets excited when they come to the feeders. So recognizing that, and the little lizards that we have here in South Alabama, I even have one who's taken up residence on the patio. And so I've nicknamed him Buddy, and I check in with him when I see him, you know, how are you doing? Where have you been? So that's really not who I thought I was.
Yes.
But I think that appreciating, I'm learning to appreciate creation in a new way. And I have started the ritual of beginning my day with a cup of coffee or a cup of tea and my journal and sitting out on the patio and just appreciating, you know, the birds chirping. Unfortunately, I recently witnessed a hawk choosing to have a bird for breakfast, and that was kind of distressing. But there was nothing I could do about that. So that's part of the process too, because he needs to eat.
And I suppose one of the real challenges I perceive is that how do we emerge from this pandemic and insist that our leaders and corporate powers don't go back to the destruction of nature and the economic destruction of human institutions and relationships. And I think we have a powerful resource in Catholic social teaching and in Pope Francis's environmental theology for we women in the church to join in the struggle of others for a more just and sustainable future after this.
You know, this pandemic, even before the recent murders, I saw the pandemic as being very similar to racism, in that it is so pervasive, it's everywhere, but you don't know it until you get the virus, or until there's a racist attack against you, or you experience, you know, a microaggression. I think that moving forward, one of the key lessons of the pandemic is that we can deny ourselves something to benefit the common good. We can deny ourselves the effort to go get a haircut. I mean, I've been amazed by the number of people who complained that they couldn't get a haircut.
I cut my own.
Yes, I do too. So I didn't get that. And when you go get a haircut, then you are requiring someone to be there to cut your hair. And they cannot afford to be there just to cut your hair. So that means, you know, the shop is going to have to open up. So I found a great selfishness in that. But the effort of us sheltering in place, and then when that is changing, going out with a mask, it's a form of self-denial. I enjoy going to the grocery store when I can take a leisurely, you know, stroll through the store. But I enjoy, in the South, we speak to people that we pass. We make eye contact and we speak to each other. And to do this now without being able to smile to someone, I terribly miss smiles. I miss giving a smile. I miss receiving them. But that act of denial is for the common good. And I hope that the lessons of that we can deny ourselves what we enjoy to protect the common good, promote the common good. We can do this. And I think that in a similar way, we can move forward to embrace the voices of women. You know, we most often speak of God with male pronouns, but we actually know that God is neither male nor female. So, but there is definitely, throughout Scripture, there are feminine pronouns that are also used for God. And there are experiences of being woman. I'm sorry, I knocked something over. There are experiences, I believe, of being woman that that allow us to speak of life and the relationship with creation and the relationship with God in a unique way that is able to enrich all of the church.
Yeah.
But we have to, I think there's a great value in listening. That listening to engage in dialogue, listening to understand the other, not always issuing dictates of this is. because I have a lived experience through which I have learned much. And that lived experience influences how I read scripture. It influences my understanding of worship. My lived experience is what contributed to the piece that you read from my essay. And speaking of how I hear the gospel reading about Moses leading his people from bondage.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So, and so that I hear differently because I'm an African American, but I do not have children, but I would imagine that when scripture speaks of the divine with a feminine pronoun of being a loving mother, that you as a mother get that in a way that those of us who are not parents cannot. And so there continues to be hope. Only God knows how long it's going to take us to get it. As long as there's breath in the body, we hope.
And I just think that's such a note to end on, actually. Leslie, it's been so good chatting to you. I don't know, I have your blog, I can share my screen. I wonder if you'd like to end by reading something you could choose from your blog. I can screen share.
Would you? Oh, great.
Yeah, I can screen share so that you can see it. I'll just pull it up. We
Okay.
might have here we are. Yeah, there it
Oh,
is.
technology.
Now, what would you like me to get up?
Well, actually, that's what I wrote this morning, the conviction of her spirit.
Why don't you just tell us a little bit about it and then read it for us, and we'll kind of close on that. And before we do then, I just want to thank you so much. We were last together in Rome in 2018. We had a wonderful time. And I do so hope and pray that real touch-to-touch relationships will be re-established soon. But in the meantime, it's been wonderful to meet you again in this virtual format, and know that all my prayers and love are with you in this added trauma to what already for all of us is a very challenging time.
Tina, thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation, and I always enjoy speaking with you. So this was a wonderful opportunity to reconnect, and I look forward to us being physically present with each other again someday.
Thank you. So over to you. Here's your blog.
Okay, this one I wrote this morning, and the name Darnella, I'm only using her first name because she is the young woman who used her cell phone to capture the 8 minutes and 46 seconds of which George Floyd's neck was knelt on by a law enforcement officer that led to his death. Darnella did not seek this trauma, but like so many of our ancestors, she was thrust into a situation forever altering her understanding of humanity and man's grave capacity to embrace evil and disregard the dignity of another. That she had the wherewithal to suspend herself in time and place for 8 minutes and 46 seconds to capture George's final struggle with death by a callous and cold-hearted asphyxiation speaks to the conviction of her spirit. It is through such selfless acts that lived experience cannot be denied, and we choose to bend the moral arc of the universe closer towards justice, all because of one person's courage in the face of profound injustice.